Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to our webinar tonight, delving into diet with rheumatoid arthritis. I'm Tracy. I'm Health Communications Advisor at Arthritis New Zealand, and we have Julianne Taylor on with us tonight. Hi, Julianne.
Hello, hi.
Thanks for being with us. So just before we get started, I'll just start with a karakia. So the English version of this is come forth from above, below, within, and from the environment, vitality and well-being for all, strengthened in unity. So it's just to bring us all together tonight into this kaupapa. Me noi tātou, tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai, te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Just introduce you to our guest speaker tonight. Julianne is a registered nutritionist with an extensive experience working with clients across a wide range of health conditions, particularly those with autoimmune diseases. She has a keen interest in dietary approaches to reduce inflammation and improve overall health. So without further ado, over to you, Julianne.
Hi everyone. Lovely to be here. So I'll get started. I've got a ton of information. Some of it is a bit more sciencey and some of it is more practical, but hopefully by the end of it, those of you who like science will have your questions answered, and those of you who just want to know what to eat will know what to eat. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to cover tonight is we're going to look at the relationship between your gut and rheumatoid arthritis. Obviously, if we're talking about food, we're talking about your gut, because that's the interaction between your whole body and the food that you eat. We're looking at why the Mediterranean diet is recommended, the whys, what dietary principles work and why. We'll look at food sensitivity. Do you actually need to cut out foods? Or look at popular diets like gluten-free, dairy-free, paleo, autoimmune protocol, Patterson program, vegan, vegetarian, what place they all have. And things like nightshades. Do they affect arthritis? Is it just a myth? And some meal planning tips. Okay, so first off, I'll just run through a little bit of background on rheumatoid arthritis. I imagine those of you who've got rheumatoid will definitely know some of this information, but for those who don't, just a little bit of info. So rheumatoid arthritis is a complex systemic autoimmune disease that affects the whole body. It primarily affects the synovial membrane of the joints, so it's a specific part of the joint. It has the systemic effects include cardiovascular, that's your heart and blood vessels, neurological, your brain and nerves, your lungs, and there are other factors like fatigue and sleep disturbances. There's a big genetic component, so 80% carry a specific gene that predisposes you to arthritis. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. And many people, as you know, if you affected yourself, your ability to carry out daily activities and your sleep is affected as well. So what about New Zealand? So New Zealand is interesting. The latest stats came out 2023, and 133,000 adults are affected. In Māori, 21,000. It's the third most common arthritis. Gout, osteoarthritis, and rheumatoid arthritis are the three most common ones. 3.7% of women and 2.7% of men. And of course, as you get older, you're much more likely to be affected. If you are affected, many of you know that you might be on disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs like methotrexate or some of the biological DMARDs. You might take corticosteroids, and you might have daily anti-inflammatory drugs as well. So there have been some studies on unmet needs. So we've got all these amazing new medical treatments and drugs that have actually had a big impact on preventing and slowing joint damage compared to, say, my mother-in-law who had rheumatoid arthritis, and her hands and feet are severely affected. And people report unacceptable levels of pain, physical disability, fatigue, and suboptimal mental health. And interestingly, even though we have all these new biological DMARDs, levels of fatigue haven't decreased over the years. And in 2018, the Ministry of Health in New Zealand reported that 46.5% of people report difficulty performing daily activities. So there's definitely more we can hopefully do. And I'm hoping that you'll see that diet might have an effect on some of those. So what contributes to autoimmune disease? So first of all, we have your environment. So if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, the lungs are one aspect, inhalants like smoking, silica dust, other environmental things, antibiotics, which kill off your gut bacteria, low vitamin D levels, and certain infections can trigger autoimmune diseases. And there are changes in the gut microbiome, the lung microbiome, and the oral microbiome. And so that leads to the gut being impacted and also periodontal disease. And if you are genetically predisposed, then your immune system responds in a different way, and we start making antibodies to our own tissue, and we start attacking our own tissue. So what I'm going to look at just briefly is the microbiome, because I find the whole idea of having this zoo of microbes in our gut absolutely fascinating. So if we take a pin, and if we take the head of a pin, if you see this picture here, these are bacteria sitting on the head of a pin. So we have bacteria all around us. They're microscopic, obviously, we can't see them. And there are trillions of them. In our gut, there are 100 trillion. It weighs about the size of our brain if you were to take them all out. And a fifth of a teaspoon contains more bacteria than there are people on Earth. And it's not just bacteria. We've got these other creatures called archaea. We've got fungi, we've got protozoa, we've got viruses, and we've got viruses that actually live on the bacteria in our gut. So if we took our intestine with all its folds and villi and we laid it flat, it would fill the area of a tennis court. And if you think about our gut, from our mouth down to our poop hole is one continuous tube, and it's actually the outside of our body. So we have the area of a tennis court interacting the outside of our body with the inside of our body. And our gut microbiome, our gut epithelium is just one cell layer thick. So you can see how it could really contribute if things go AWOL in our gut bacteria. Okay, so what we're going to look at is dysbiosis. So dysbiosis is very common in autoimmune diseases. In fact, what they've found is that dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of the microbial species, or how the bacterial metabolic activities change, or the distribution of bacteria or microbes within the gut is incorrect. So all of these things are wrong. And what there is a loss of good or beneficial bacteria that make components like short chain fatty acids that our gut cells love because they feed our gut cells. We get an overgrowth of potentially pathogenic bacteria, which can cause inflammation, and we get an overall loss of bacterial diversity. So we have a lot less species in our gut. So what then happens is we get what we call, in lay terms, leaky gut, or a more correct terms, increased intestinal permeability, where these gut cells, which are linked tightly together, their little links loosen up, and bacterial components, food components, not like big chunks of food, but just like microscopic bits of food that aren't properly broken down, can get through that layer into this area underneath where there are like gazillions of immune cells. What about the connection between the gut and the joints? So what we have is this dysbiosis, which means that we get more inflammatory cytokine production. So a cytokine is a small protein. It's released by cells and it has a specific effect on other cells. It's basically a little communicating protein. And these can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So if you have dysbiosis, you have more pro-inflammatory cytokine production. We also get a breakdown in this immune barrier. The beautiful layer of mucus gets degraded and the cells are more exposed to bacteria and dietary components. We get this leakiness between the cells and we get this bacterial cell wall components crossing over from your gut into the layer underneath where there's all this immune cells. These components can move into circulation. They've even found some of these components in the joint. Then the joint gets inflamed and we create antibodies to the components in the joint and to the joint itself. So that's one of the theoretical basis of how the gut plays a role in your joint inflammation. In rheumatoid arthritis, what do we see? So when they look at the types of bacteria in the gut, you find that there are more of this Collinsella copri. I'm not sure if I've said this right, but basically this particular one weakens the protective barrier of the intestine. Then another one, Prevotella copri, has been identified as looking very similar to joint tissue. So when we leak bacterial components across the epithelial barrier, across the cells into the system, and our body goes, oh, there's a foreign invader, makes antibodies to that. If it makes antibodies to bacterial components that look a lot like our own tissue, we actually attack our own tissue at the same time. So we think this thing called molecular mimicry plays a role with rheumatoid arthritis and indeed other autoimmune diseases as well. And what we also have is a lack of lactobacillus, which is a beneficial bacteria that has a number of health promoting properties. And one of the things that these healthy bacteria do is they suppress the bad bacteria as well as making short chain fatty acids, which we'll look at now. And these short chain fatty acids actually feed our gut cells and look after our gut cells. So we like short chain fatty acids. So what do we want to do with our diet? First thing is we want to increase the microbial diversity. We want more species in our gut. Like the hunter-gatherers, what they've seen is they have an enormous range of species of bacteria in their gut. And we want to increase these short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria. We want to suppress the bad bacteria, and we can do this by having more, feeding the good ones and starving the bad ones. We want to increase the good bacteria because we want to also reduce inflammation and permeability of the gut cell wall, the leaky gut. We also want to feed our whole body in a way that reduces whole body inflammation. And partly this can be done by increasing nutrient density. So we want more nutrients in our diet. Okay, so what about the current Western diet? So this is from 1970 to 2010. I couldn't find anything more recent than that, but I'm sure it's probably got worse. But what you'll see is some things haven't changed a lot. We have appalling levels of vegetables, legumes, fruit in our diet, really, really low. We have large amounts of added sugar, increasing amounts of added fats and oils, and increasing amounts of grain products. And, excuse me, most of the grain products that we eat are not whole grains. The majority of wheat, majority is wheat, and the majority is white flour. And so what most people eat in New Zealand is about a third of their diet is made up of white flour in various ways. It's your toast for breakfast, it's your pasta, it's your buns, your cakes, your cookies, your crackers, your cereals. We have white flour in numerous different forms. And then we have white flour that's boiled in fat and coated in sugar, otherwise known as donuts. So in New Zealand, we have about 40% of our diet. In the USA, it's even worse. It's about 60% made up of these ultra-processed foods that are completely made of white flour, added oil, and white sugar. And you can see the actual real component of our diet is actually quite small. I mean real as in minimally processed foods. And the problem is, excuse me, my throat's tickling. The problem is with these foods is they're highly refined. They've got very low nutrients for the amount of calories we're consuming, almost no fiber, and they're also high in salt. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So you could say on this side of the graphic, we've got foods with low human interference. And on this side is all the products that we eat made out of refined grains, added fats and oils, and sugars. And so our Western diet is heavily weighted towards those foods. So here's the problem. When we have a diet that's heavily weighted with highly processed foods, high sugar, high fat, all the additives like emulsifiers, we make more toxic metabolites, the hyperglycemia, and it reduces the microbes. We get less mucus, we get more mucus degradation in our gut. Whereas if we look at the foods that actually feed our good gut bacteria, they're just a really small part of the modern Western diet. And these are the phytochemicals, the omega-3s, the high diet fiber, the prebiotic fibers that feed our gut bacteria, make the short-chain fatty acids, enhance the mucus secretion in the gut, and increase the antimicrobial peptides, the good chemicals in the gut that the bacteria make. So the Western diet leads to, as I said, degradation of your mucus, leaky gut, inflamed cells, and inflammation, barrier dysfunction, as opposed to the foods that feed our gut bacteria, which enhance the mucus and make our tight junctions nice and tight so nothing kind of leaks through, and makes the barrier in our gut really functional. Okay, so the very first place that we can start to improve our well-being is by reducing, we still need our treats and our ice cream every now and then. But we do need to reduce the amount of food that's made of white flour, oil, and white sugar in its many different forms, and increase or expand the section of foods with low human interference. So I would say that's the very first place to start. Often we think of, well, should we do, I don't know, a paleo diet, or should we do a vegan or plant-based diet, or should we go vegetarian? But often the best place to start is just by expanding the low human interference foods. So what I'm going to look at now is some of the science behind a little bit more depth around why these different food components are included in our diet. And as you can see, they're all part of probably what would be best described as a Mediterranean type diet. And we'll also look at the whole food sensitivity issue as well, quite briefly. Okay, so powerful polyphenols. So what's a polyphenol? A polyphenol is, you see all these little rings here? That's a phenol ring. So all of these chemicals that we find in plants in particular are different arrangements of these phenol rings.
And with the phenol rings, that means that they're a color, right? So that represents that they're different colors.
Yes, so they're all different colors. So you can see that with the berries and the fruit, you've got, you know, the cranberries, blueberries, pomegranates, but some of them are like found in things like linseed and oats, red wine, grapes. Yeah, so basically all the colors that you find in food. So here's an interesting study that I found, which really describes how powerful polyphenols can be. So these were elderly people, and as we get older, our gut tends to, just with part of the aging process, our gut doesn't work quite as well. Like lots of things don't work quite as well when we get older, unfortunately, but our gut is one of those things. We tend to have a gut that's a little bit more leaky. We tend to have more inflammation in our gut, and there's some chemicals that actually measure in your blood that can tell us, and in your poop as well, that can tell us if there's inflammation or if there's leakiness. So one of them is called zonulin, and zonulin is a measure of leakiness in the gut. And zonulin levels, so all of these elderly people, over 60 years old, in a rest home environment, so they could kind of control their diet. They ate their normal diet, or they ate a diet with added polyphenols every day. And they added things like blood orange, pomegranate, green tea, stewed apples, dark chocolate, and various berries. So they added these to their diet, otherwise they made no changes at all. And after 8 weeks, compared to their normal diet, their zonulin levels went down. That means they had less leaky gut. The fiber fermenting butyrate, those good bacteria that produce the short chain fatty acids that we really want in our gut, increased. Their blood pressure went down, and they could measure that their polyphenols went up as well. So just by increasing those colourful foods, they improved their gut. And what's cool is one of these is dark chocolate, I think. Okay, so what else? So these phenol rings are really good at reacting with free radicals. So free radicals are the things that are damaging in our environment. And as you can see, a lot of these free radicals are things that affect your risk or your risk of rheumatoid arthritis, like air pollution, smoking. So phenol rings actually reactivate with the free radicals and deactivate their damaging reactivity. So that's another reason to include polyphenol-rich fruit and vegetables. So although we don't have although the number of RCTs on dietary polyphenols and RA is limited, existing evidence shows their potential benefits, mainly increasing DAS28, which is probably what your rheumatologist will check as your measure of disease activity, reducing C-reactive protein and erythrocyte sedimentation rate, and improves oxidative stress. Okay, here's another study which is actually done in people with rheumatoid arthritis. So this time they did like a multi-fiber supplement, and they either did these fiber bars or fiber-rich cereal, and they added this fiber-rich cereal with about 15 grams of fiber every day. So I've put all the different fibers down here. So they had oats, psyllium husk, ground flaxseed, inulin, arrowroot, guar gum, coconut flour, and hemp. So these were all of the components of the fiber-rich cereal or fiber bar. And they measured the markers of intestinal inflammation, intestinal permeability, and various immune cells. So this is what they found. After 28 days. So there's no control in this. So really it is a bit of a preliminary study. Unfortunately, a lot of studies are preliminary. There aren't enough dietary studies in rheumatoid arthritis, to be honest. Anyway, after 28 days, their calprotectin was down. That's a measure of gut inflammation. Their zonulin was down. That's a measure of gut permeability. When they did their kind of questionnaires, their physical functioning and general health improved. Various regulatory T cells, so that these immune cells, went in a favorable direction. And what they found in previous studies, that RA patients have an abnormal ratio of these Th1, Th17 T cells. And they had decreased markers of bone erosion. So that means that your bone is less likely to degrade as quickly. So that's another good thing. And that was just adding fiber, making no other changes to the diet. And here's another study, which is pretty cool. It's about fermented foods. This was done on healthy people. So there were 36 adults in the study. They did it for 10 weeks, and they had either fermented foods or high fiber foods. So what we want to know about fermented foods is they're one way of increasing the diversity of bacteria in your gut and increasing the types of bacteria that will break down food into short-chain fatty acids. And what we do know about people with, some people, their diversity is very low, and some of those bacteria are very low. So even if you eat more fiber, it may not have that effect that we want until we increase the microbial diversity. So what they did was they found that the group that had fermented foods increased their microbial diversity. And the more servings they had, the more diversity increased. That's a good thing. And they found that the high fermented food diet decreased inflammatory signals and activity in the gut. And 19 inflammatory proteins in the blood decreased. And one of those is linked to rheumatoid arthritis. Again, that's a good thing. The high fiber diet increased microbiome function. So both were beneficial, but the fermented food had the biggest impact on increasing microbiome diversity, which is what we want. Okay, next topic, polyunsaturated fats in our diet. So we saw that the current Western diet has added a lot of omega vegetable oils, and many of those oils are high in omega-6. And you also find a lot of omega-6 in the form of arachidonic acid in the fat in red meat, in organ meats, and in egg yolks. Our current Western diet has an imbalance, and primarily because we're adding all these vegetable oils and we're not getting enough omega-3 rich food. And the omega-3 is the building blocks or the precursors of a whole range of anti-inflammatory mediators, cytokines, resolvins, protectins, maricins, and these chemicals actively turn off or down-regulate inflammation. So here's a little diagram of kind of how it works. So when we have an infection or an injury, we get these inflammatory cytokines, we get heat, swelling, and pain, we get white blood cells coming to the area. Unfortunately, this can trigger an autoimmune reaction in some people, and we get increased antibodies, and the immune response might persist over and over again. What we can do to help resolve this or switch down the inflammation caused by this is by increasing the omega-3 in our diet and making these anti-inflammatory components that switch off or switch down the inflammation. So when we have a higher intake of omega-3, either by supplement or by food, the omega-3 is one supplement that consistently shows a positive effect in rheumatoid arthritis. it can take time. So you need to be consistently increasing your omega-3 over several weeks. It can take 12 to 24 weeks, they've seen in the studies. And the dose is important. It needs to be quite high to be effective. And it's even more effective if you reduce the omega-6 fats than only increasing omega-3 fats. And there's an additive effect when you add olive oil into your diet, which also has an anti-inflammatory effect. The good thing about omega-3, it also increases these butyrate producing bacteria in your gut, and it helps the intestinal cell wall integrity because it's anti-inflammatory in the cell wall in your gut. Okay, how do we get plenty of omega-3? So I've got a list here of the different seafoods that are high in omega-3. So the oilier and the darker the fish, the more omega-3, darker flesh, the fish, the more omega-3 you'll find in it. You can also find omega-3 in mussels and various shellfish. Mussels are particularly good. And there's plant omega-3s in certain seeds, chia, flaxseed and their oil, canola oil, and walnuts in particular. However, this is a slightly different form and not the active form, and our body has to convert it into the active forms. So not quite as effective, but still really important to have in our diet. What about all the other nutrients? So why should we have a nutrient-rich diet? All nutrients are crucial for health, for the immune system, for healing and managing inflammation. And I won't run through these individually, but there are the findings of the 2008-2009 nutrition survey in New Zealand found that many nutrients were deficient in people's diets in New Zealand. And I've just highlighted this about the omega-3. 80% do not get the recommended intake. And that's way, way lower than the optimal intake for decreasing inflammation and rheumatoid arthritis. So optimal micronutrients reduce inflammation in multiple ways. So pretty much every nutrient affects inflammation markers, affects gut microbiome, affects your immune system, and affects these either whether we make anti-inflammatory or pro-inflammatory cytokines and various measures like C-reactive protein. So really what I'm saying is have a nutrient-rich diet in order to reduce inflammation in your body. Food additives. So this is an interesting thing. This is really a really useful paper where it goes through all the food additives and their kind of individual effects on the gut microbiome or on our body in particular. So what it looked at was things like sugar, salt, emulsifiers, gluten, organic solvents that are used in food processing, nanoparticles, microbial transglutaminase, which is used to kind of stick bits of meat together, and surfactants, which are basically, you find those in cleaners, in dishwashing powder, things like that. And what this author said was all the food ingredients here abrogate or help break down the human epithelial barrier function and increase intestinal permeability through the opened tight junctions, resulting in the entry of foreign immunogenic antigens and the activation of the autoimmune cascade. So a little bit of additives is probably not a problem, but when you have a diet that's increased in all these highly processed foods, there is really an additive effect of all these different components, these chemicals that we've added to our foods. Okay, so when we look at all the dietary studies done in rheumatoid arthritis, there's a little bit of a confounder. So, and this is where we have the question, well, should I should I go low carb? Should I go Mediterranean? Should I go autoimmune protocol? What about paleo? What about plant-based or plant only? If we look at all the dietary studies, the common thing that they've done is they have removed these ultra-processed foods. And whether it is Mediterranean, which includes the whole plethora of low human interference foods, or whether it's plant-based, which includes plant-only foods and removes animal foods, or paleo, which removes legumes and cereal grains, what we see is the common component to all of these diets is they're all high and low human interference foods, and they pretty much all, for the dietary studies anyway, take out these ultra-processed foods. Gosh, I have to shoot through. Anyway, the other thing that we'll find is many of these diets also eliminate certain food groups. So they remove all the ultra-processed foods, and some remove grains, some remove dairy, some remove meat, some remove certain carbohydrates. So there's also a type of elimination going on. And it's a little bit hard to know, is the diet working because of the things we eliminated, or is the diet working because it's a really like whole food diet? And this is a question that very few studies have actually asked. We do know that Mediterranean diets consistently show improvements in a number of measures of rheumatoid arthritis disease activity. And we know that vegan and vegetarian diets also show improvement, although some of these studies have an elimination reintroduction component to them. So they're not just purely vegetarian or vegan. There is a rheumatologist, and I do have this book, it's quite interesting. So this is a rheumatologist in the UK who did a whole series of elimination reintroduction diets with quite a number of patients. And what she said was there's a subgroup who remain well off all medication and controlled by diet alone for periods of up to 13 years. And she wrote this in 2004. Others relapse. The effect is not universal, and it seems to be that 35 to 40% of RA patients can remain off medication through dietary therapy alone. And she's written a whole book on her dietary strategy. I've done a scoping review on elimination reintroduction diets. And one of the things I did was look at all the diets where they identified foods that people reacted to and added them up cumulatively for the number of people. And there's certainly a pattern to what foods people react to with rheumatoid arthritis. So the most common ones are dairy, cereal grains, in particular corn, like corn chips, corn tortillas, and wheat, gluten grains, egg, beef, pork, and sugar. And there's a number of other things as well, but they're by far these highest bars. And Nightshades. So I did a bit of a dive into where does nightshade elimination come from? And you know what? There have been 0 studies in rheumatoid arthritis removing nightshades to see what the effect is. However, there's a doctor called Dr. Norman Childers who was a plant person, and he, at the recommendation of his doctor, removed nightshades from his diet, and his arthritis cleared up. And he went on to write a book about the nightshade-free diet back in 1993. And he got a whole lot of people to try it and got feedback from them, and found a certain percentage of people actually got a decrease in their symptoms. The only other study or I found with people with an autoimmune issue is a survey on people with psoriasis. So they said that the percentage of patients reporting skin improvement was greatest after reducing alcohol, gluten, nightshades, and adding fish oil and omega-3, vegetables, and vitamin D. So nightshades have these components called glycoalkaloids that definitely affects intestinal permeability, and that's been seen in people with inflammatory bowel disease. So should you exclude foods? First, I would say improve your diet overall. If you choose to eliminate gluten, get a celiac blood test first, because if you remove gluten and you find that you're dramatically improved, you don't know if you celiac disease or if you've just got non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and that is quite important to know. I suggest you work with a registered nutritionist or dietitian. Food sensitivity tests are not accurate for finding foods that affect arthritis. Don't waste your money. And it seems like people with other allergies, like, I don't know, allergies, sinus allergies, whatever, are more likely to have food sensitivities that affect their rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, so we'll just look at a couple of diets and then we'll hopefully finish in about 5 minutes. So this is a really recent diet and there's only preliminary results coming in so far, but it has been presented at a rheumatology conference and the results look really promising. They did a pilot study which had really good results for half the participants. And anyway, this is what they call the ITIS diet. And the protocol for this diet is really interesting because it goes into depth explaining why they increase certain foods and why they remove certain foods. And all of the things we've talked about so far, increasing omega-3 fats, reducing omega-6 fats, saturated fats, and trans fats, increasing monounsaturated fats that's found in olive oil, avocado, and nuts, all the prebiotics, the fermented foods, and the high fiber foods that feed your gut bacteria, enzyme-rich fruits, polyphenol-rich foods, anti-inflammatory spices, and they started their day with a green juice from fruits and vegetables. They avoided red meat, which is interesting because red meat seems to be the meat that people react to more than, say, poultry or seafood. Took out processed foods, took out high salt foods, all dairy products except one well-fermented yogurt for their fermented foods, gluten. They took out the nightshade family, refined grains, fried foods, those damaged fats are really not good for you, all the sugary foods and beverages, and the alcohol. So it sounds like a pretty restricted diet in some ways. Here's just an overview. I won't go into detail, but of the foods they recommended. Here's like a picture of a day's eating. And this is what happened. And the latest study they've done, they've actually compared it against a good quality Mediterranean diet. So does a diet with these different additions and some subtractions work better than a Mediterranean diet, which we already know works well? So 44 patients so far on either the Mediterranean or the ITIS diets. Both diets showed significant improvements in health indicators. So significant improvements. I think that's really important. Both diets did. They worked. The ones on the ITIS diet had greater reductions in pain and fatigue. And those, remember, are the unmet needs that people complain about with rheumatoid arthritis. Remission was achieved in 11% of the ITIS diet people, but no Mediterranean diet people reached remission, and that was over 3 months. So again, super interesting. Now, my study, briefly, so this is the autoimmune protocol. It's kind of not dissimilar to the itis diet, except it does include red meat, and it does take out a lot more seeds and nuts and grains and legumes as well. But it does increase vegetables and fruit a lot, increases omega-3, and increases those monounsaturated fats. So there's a lot of similarities between that and the itis diet. And here are the reasons for, I won't go into all of these because we're a bit short of time, but these are all the reasons why we take out all the foods on the AIP diet. I think, and we think, people that are teach the AIP diet, that a lot of these are not necessary, and there's now a modified version of the AIP diet that is less restrictive, which I think is actually a good thing. So one of the questionnaires I did weekly was the RAPID-3, Routine Assessment of Patient Index Data 3, which has a whole lot of questions on your ease of doing various activities, your pain related to rheumatoid arthritis, and how well you're doing considering all the ways RA affects you, which is your global something, forgotten the name of it. So the first 4 weeks, people didn't change their diets. And on average, in those first 4 weeks, some people's RAPID-3 jumped around a little bit. But when people started the AIP diet, you can see that over time, they got more and more improvement, except for one person. So one person got a little bit worse. So again, it's not like a magic bullet, but it certainly had a big impact on 6 out of 9 people, whereas most people went into remission at 8 weeks. Some people were already in remission levels when they started, so that was kind of one downside of some of the participants. And again, fatigue, very much like the itis diet, huge improvement in fatigue, and people in the diet said they noticed how much better their energy levels were. So the fatigue improved quite dramatically, down to almost 0 to 1 for everybody except that one person who didn't respond to the diet. So how should we be eating, just to finish off? A low human interference diet. So we want our healthy fatty acids, nuts and seeds, olive oil, avocado, omega-3, fish oil, or from plants. Carbohydrates, we want the fiber and the polyphenols, in particular from our carbohydrates. Protein, we want our protein to be anti-inflammatory, so remove highly processed proteins like, bacon and ham and those, and sausages and those kind of things. Have fresh proteins, probably more white poultry and seafood and plant proteins, as opposed to red meat and maybe dairy. And aim for 30 different plant foods each week. And it's not hard to get if you kind of broaden the way you think about things. So if you have a couple of packs of your smoothie mix and your frozen berries, and you throw in a few greens and some ginger and turmeric and some protein powder into your morning smoothie, you've already got like 10 different plant foods. If you're doing your oats and you throw in some psyllium, some chia seeds, some LSA, put your mixed nut butter or mixed seeds and nuts on top, you've got to, and some fruit, and you've got a whole bunch of different plant foods. For your lunch, leftovers are totally convenient. That's my lunch, but you can make, mini quiches with lots of veggies, fruit and veg and salad, and chicken legs or tinned fish, and these kind of medley, rice and quinoa, or rice and veggies, or rice and lentils. vegetable soup, have your whole grain sandwiches with a ton of veggies and some protein in there, or maybe wraps. If you're getting sushi, go for more sashimi, edamame beans, and seaweed on the side. For your dinners, a mixed medley of tray bake, all your different kumara colours. You're getting different polyphenols in each different kumara colour, red and white onion, beetroot, parsnip, capsicum and tomato if you tolerate them. Marinate your chicken with, lemon juice and rosemary and thyme. Get your 5-bean mix instead of single beans if you're making, I don't know, a bolognese sauce or a Mexican sauce. Get mixed veggies instead.
The first one I want to ask is related to your study. So the itis one and your one, are the RA patients still on their normal RA drugs in these studies?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, they are. So they started, one of the things that they do in most studies, and what I did in my study was people had been on supplements for the same supplement for 8 weeks or longer and the same medication for 8 weeks or longer, and they didn't change any of their medication or supplements during the study. So I wanted to focus wholly on food, and I didn't have any recommendations as to lifestyle changes or exercise changes or anything like that. It was just purely about the food that they ate.
Awesome. Lynn asks, she has psoriatic arthritis, and will this information also apply to her?
Yes, I have used this with, there's a guy on Instagram, he's called Autoimmune in Aotearoa. That's his handle. His name's Andy, and he won't mind me saying so because I worked with him years ago. He's got psoriatic arthritis. He has stayed off medication and controlled his psoriatic arthritis purely through using the autoimmune protocol, which he used initially, and then he has added various foods back in without an issue. So he knows that there's certain trigger foods that he avoids, but there's plenty of foods that he can eat. And he's been doing that for a number of years and controlling it.
And when people are experimenting with diet, you definitely recommend that they let their GP and their specialist know so that they can adjust medications or talk to them about interactions, because you might not just have RA, you might have a whole lot of other conditions. So you definitely need to just make sure you let your specialist know so they can give you some tailored advice that's for you if you're not seeing a dietitian as well. But ideally, you'd be seeing both.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because when you change your diet, things change, like your blood glucose levels go down. So if you've got things like metabolic syndrome, you're taking things for high blood pressure, you're taking medication for, say, diabetes or pre-diabetes, those things in particular might need to be adjusted. Because as you change your diet, you might get changes, like we've seen some of those studies, people's blood pressure dropped. And we see blood glucose dropping when people's diet changes as well. So yeah, that's quite important to let them know. One of the things I tracked was discriminatory pain relief. So how much additional, like Panadol or Nurofen, people were taking each day, and some people were able to reduce their anti-inflammatory drugs, which was a good thing.
Definitely a good thing.
Mm.
And when you were talking about omega-3s, a few people have asked about, if you can't have shellfish or fish. And
Yes.
I personally take a microalgae supplement, and it's an algae. So it is from the sea, but it's plant-based, and it's where the fish get their algae. And it is the one that's high in EPA and DHA.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly what I would recommend for people that, because there's the two types of omega-3. There's a plant omega-3, which is a shorter chain. It's 18 carbons long. And in our body, we need to extend that to 20, 22, 24 carbons. And
that's
that's
the
difficult.
ALA, isn't it?
It's ALA, so we need to make it into EPA, DPA, and DHA. And that's not very well done by many people. So it's important to get in our diet, but it may not be effective enough. So algae or vegan, they often see it as vegan omega-3 is the perfect other way to go if you're allergic to shellfish or seafood. Yeah.
And so someone has asked, just very straight, does taking daily fish oil help?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But as I said, the studies show that it may take several weeks to have the full impact, and dose matters. So they found that for people with rheumatoid arthritis, if you look at the back of your bottle, you'll see how much EPA and DHA are in each capsule. The amount they've found to be effective is 2,500 to 3,000 milligrams a day. So I recommend that people get a good quality concentrated omega-3. Ethical Nutrients is a good brand that you can get off the shelf. They do tend to be more expensive, but you get by with taking 4 capsules a day versus 10 of the cheap, ginormous bottles of fish oil, which are often variable quality as well.
And so can you say that amount again? And just to clarify, is that of a combined EPA and DHA?
Yes, so you add the EPA plus the DHA together. So you might see on a standard bottle of omega-3, it will say 1,000 milligram capsules. But per capsule, there's EPA and DHA added together is about 300 or 350. So you would need to take about 8 capsules of those a day to get the recommended dose to reduce inflammation and rheumatoid arthritis. However, there are some brands that are concentrated and you'll get 700 milligrams of EPA and DHA per capsule. So you only need to take 4 capsules a day. The other thing that's really important when you're taking a high dose of omega-3 is that your diet needs to be rich in vitamin C and vitamin E, because that keeps the omega-3, which is a very unstable fat, stable in your body. So if you improve your diet, generally what I found in my study is the vitamin C intake in my group tripled, because their fruit and vegetables went up and their fiber. And the other interesting thing is, people go, what about fiber? In the autoimmune protocol, you're taking out grains, you're taking out cereals, you're taking out legumes. The interesting thing was, even though people were having quite a lot of grains, they only had 1 serving of whole grains a day. So when they switched to fruit and vegetables, their fiber doubled overnight, even though all this other fiber was being taken out, because they actually weren't eating it. And that is very typical of the average diet.
Yeah, they were eating the wrong type. And with just, I'm always referring back to the American College of Rheumatology guidelines,
Yes.
and they have their integrative guidelines from 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And they do recommend against supplementing dietary supplements for RA, but reasons for that could be a lack of robust evidence, or why else do you think that is?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised they don't. Well, I suppose they do recommend eating a high. I mean, ideally, you want to get all your nutrients from diet. I think that's the
Yeah,
primary reason.
I think that's the
Rather
main
than
reason
go,
too.
okay, I'm low in nutrients, I need to get them from supplements. And omega-3, to be honest, it's much better to get omega-3 from seafood and plant sources of omega-3, because you get a whole range of nutrients and cofactors as well.
From eating the food rather than
Yeah,
taking
like
the supplement.
seafood, for
Yeah,
example,
definitely.
is high in iodine, selenium, zinc, a whole lot of minerals that are low in our soil in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Food first.
Food first.
But
Yeah.
if you can't, then yeah, supplement.
Then supplement. Yeah. But,
Yeah.
when you start taking supplements, people will go, okay, I'm taking a magnesium, and the magnesium has, something else added and something else added. And then you're taking a multivitamin on top of that. And by the time you add up all those nutrients, you could be overdoing some and undoing others. Like there's always, it's a little
Yeah.
bit about, yeah,
Yeah, it does get complicated when you're
it
doing
does.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about different ways of cooking fish? Does that alter the omega-3, such as smoking?
That's a good question. And I don't
Mm.
think it does. I think perhaps some would be a little bit damaged. Like omega-3 is a very unstable oil. So high heat cooking and burning is never a good thing for protein foods anyway. Um, I don't think smoking does. I think smoked fish still has high omega-3, but I'd have to double check that.
And yes, you did mention a brand before as your recommendation for an omega-3 supplement. Can you
Yeah.
just say the brand
Um,
again?
the brand, I mean, there are, I think, like Go Healthy is good.
Mm.
I think that's concentrated. Ethical Nutrients is made by Metagenics. Metagenics is a big um, practitioner only brand, but they have an off the shelf brand called Ethical Nutrients, which is almost it looks to me to be identical to the practitioner only one that you buy for twice the price.
And what about clinicians? Because we see
And
that.
Clinicians, I understand, is a pretty good brand as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, if you can find, like years ago, I started importing a brand from the States, which is batch tested for oxidation, impurities, and levels of omega-3. And if you can find brands that have are like
Mm.
batch tested and properly, checked for those things, that's good. But you'd probably have to go to the manufacturer or maybe look at the small print on the bottle. It's kind of hard to know. And the Liggins Institute took 30 off the shelf omega-3s back, that would have been
Study.
10 years ago, and half of them were oxidized, didn't have
Mm.
the levels of omega that they're supposed to have, had impurities in them that were not great. So it's, yeah, but hit and miss with the omega-3, especially when you're going for the cheaper brands.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you know, I don't know off the top of my head, but do
Mm.
you know if there's any at the Chemist Warehouse that would be good brands?
Well, Ethical Nutrients is at Chemist
They're
Warehouse.
there? Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. There probably are others as well, but I haven't, to be honest, I haven't really looked into it. I just sort of automatically. Nordic Naturals, I believe, is
Oh, yeah,
another good brand.
thank you. And a few other conditions are coming up. So ankylosing spondylitis,
Yeah,
undifferentiated ankylosing spondylitis. Would there be any crossover there? And for Sjogren's as well?
yeah, Sjogren's, there's some, oh gosh, I can't remember, but Sjogren's, possibly. That seems to be my experience with people with Sjogren's, is that it's more tricky.
Mm.
I
And
Two of my people in the study, one had Sjogren's, one had, well, her clinical notes said she had Sjogren's, and she noticed that her mouth was less dry and she only needed to use her eye drops like once a day. So she definitely improved. The other person didn't. Um, Ankylosing spondylitis is a little bit different. There is a gut bacteria in ankylosing spondylitis called Klebsiella, and that appears to be fed by a high starch diet. Um, I haven't looked at clinical studies so much in ankylosing spondylitis, but I've worked with a few people. And sometimes when you work with people, you get input from the people you work with. So the diet that seems to have been most effective with one, and it's on the internet. It's called the, oh gosh, it's just gone from my brain. Anyway, it's a type of low starch diet, but basically a very similar whole food but low starch diet. seems to be the most, it's called Keystone diet,
Oh,
seems
okay.
to be the most effective one. But
And I'm just
probably hasn't been studies on it, but low starch seems to be the one that seems to be more effective with ankylosing spondylitis, because it stops feeding the Klebsiella bacteria.
so someone's asked about osteoarthritis too.
Yeah, a lot of the same principles.
Mm.
Probably not necessary to cut out any foods with osteoarthritis, although some, with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, there are some people who find that gluten affects their joints. Some people with osteoarthritis find that nightshades affect their joints, but again, it's kind of more anecdotal type evidence. But we do know that with osteoarthritis, there seems to be a link with visceral fat as well. So that's internal abdominal fat, because it increases certain cytokines, and some of those cytokines, or those, inflammatory chemicals, are actually found in the fat pads around the knees. Because what's interesting in osteoarthritis is it tends to occur in certain joints, unless it's triggered by damage. There are people that get it like in their knees commonly, for example. So there seems to be an inflammatory component to that. So anything that you can do to reduce inflammation and reduce internal visceral fat is quite important. So just the same dietary principles would apply for sure. And
So Wendy asks, is powdered stevia okay as a sweetener?
I think it is. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it is plant-based.
And Nikki's asking about hemp seed oil. So that fits into the
Yeah, that's the plant
omega-3 that's more
omega-3.
ALA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So Mia's asking, what's your take on low starch diets for AIP? Oh, for autoimmune diseases, sorry.
I would say low refined starch, like white flour. It seems there's a theory, and one person's written about it. I've forgotten his name, but he did a couple of papers on ancestral starches versus modern starches. So his theory, and he provides a lot of evidence, that ancestral starches, which are like root vegetable starches, where the starches in a cell are better for your gut because they're much more likely to feed your gut microbiome than free starches in, say, wheat flour, because of the way that you digest them in your digestive system.
Yeah. And any crossover with fibromyalgia?
Yeah,
It's a little bit out of
yeah, a
the
little bit
scope,
out of
isn't it?
my
Yeah.
area. Yeah, like one of my people had fibromyalgia as well as rheumatoid arthritis. She had most of her improvement was within the rheumatoid, but she definitely had better sleep and a lot less fatigue.
Mhm.
And like her fatigue levels went down quite a lot. She was one of the ones that responded really well.
Yeah.
But whether that was related to the fibro or the rheumatoid, I couldn't be sure.
Yeah. And where's a good resource to learn about the ITIS diet?
Yeah, I put links on most of the slides, but if
Yeah.
you look up ITIS diet protocol, there is a paper that I'm pretty sure anybody can access, and it goes into all the foods they included and all the foods they took out and all the reasons why, and all the studies linked to that.
And is there a more user-friendly resource anywhere, do you know? That
No,
doesn't cost?
no.
No.
I mean, that one doesn't cost.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
very scientific.
yeah, a little bit scientific. Yeah, I guess so.
And Eleanor's asking about multivitamins. You touched on that briefly before. What do you think with RA? And once again, just remembering everyone that American College of Rheumatology hasn't found for them and their purposes sufficient evidence to recommend any dietary supplements. So they recommend food. So
yes, like supplements aren't, to be honest, aren't really my area.
yeah,
Um,
that's okay.
yeah, I would say if you're going to take one, just a good quality multi-nutrient one would be the recommended one. Or you can go into use an app like chronometer.com, which I find quite useful, and you can track all your diet and see what nutrients you're low in. In my RA study, I tracked people's diet when they started on their normal diet and then when they went into that autoimmune protocol diet. Both the normal diet and the autoimmune protocol diet were too low in calcium and iodine. So I do recommend that everybody use iodized salt.
Yes.
It was very low in iodine and even lower because they're all using Himalayan salt and not iodized salt. Not all of them, some of them. Yeah, so that's kind of a downside of eating sometimes what we think is a healthier diet.
Yeah.
Because New Zealand soils are just low in iodine, and you can get it from kelp and things like that, seafood, sea plants,
Yeah.
and also calcium because of the mainly because the dairy was taken out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everything else kind of was at or above RDIs. Oh, apart from iron, especially in premenopausal women.
Okay.
And menstruating women. So that's another thing to watch is your
Yeah.
iron level, because that can affect rheumatoid arthritis as well. And yeah.
And I think that answers that really well when you are thinking about supplementing is to actually check your levels because you may not need to supplement as well. So just see where you're at because you don't want to have too much of something as well because then you can get into toxic levels if you went into really high doses.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said before, when people add, instead of just only magnesium, the magnesium has like 3 other different things added as well. And then on top of a multivitamin, you might get excess levels of some nutrients.
Yeah, thank you once again, Julianne. We appreciate your time and
No
for
problem
everyone for
at all.
coming along tonight and all your questions.
Yeah.
And we'll just finish with a karakia. Me nui tātou. Ka whakairea te tapu kia wātia ai te ara, kia tūriki whakataha ai, kia tūriki whakataha ai. Haumie, huie, tae kie. Thank you, everyone. Good night, Pomari.
Cool.
Ka kite.